There is a man 3,000 years ago writing a letter he will never finish. He is a scribe in a great and wealthy city on the coast of the Eastern Sea, and he is very good at his work. He presses a reed stylus into soft, wet clay, forming the small wedge-shaped marks of his trade, the way he has 10,000 times before. But his hand is not steady tonight, because outside the walls of the palace where he works, the sky is glowing the wrong color, and the letter he is writing is a cry for help. Ships have come, he writes, or rather, he writes the words his king is dictating in fear, enemy ships. They have appeared off the coast and they have burned the towns and done wicked things in the country. The army is away. The fleet is away off in distant waters. The city is undefended. Do you not know, the letter says in its ancient words, that all my troops and ships are elsewhere and the land is left to itself? Send help. Send anyone. The enemy is here. The letter was never sent. We know this because we found the clay tablet 3,000 years later, still sitting in the oven where it was being baked hard for the journey. It never left the city. The fire that took the city came first. The scribe's last letter was preserved not by the messenger who was meant to carry it, but by the very flames that made his message too late, baked hard in the burning of his world, and buried in the ruin. To be read by us 3,000 years on, its plea still unanswered. Welcome back. And if this is your first night here, then settle in. You have arrived on a strange and haunted shore. Before we go down into it, do the small thing that keeps these journeys alive. Tap subscribe and leave one comment before your eyes grow heavy, where you are, what hour it is, what you are drinking tonight. I read them all in the mornings. Now dim whatever light is still on, and let the room go soft and deep. Because tonight we are going to watch a whole world end. Not one city, not one kingdom, a whole world. The city of that unsent letter had a name. We will come to it, and it was not some lonely outpost. It was one shining node in the most connected, most prosperous, most sophisticated world the earth had ever seen up to that time. A world of great powers in constant contact, mighty Egypt, the vast Hittite Empire, the palaces of Greece, the merchant kingdoms of the coast, the ancient cities of the two rivers, all of them trading, riding to one another, marrying one another's daughters, sharing gods and goods and gold across the whole eastern Mediterranean, in a web of civilization so rich and so intricate that the people living inside it must have believed, as we believe, that it would simply go on forever. And then, in the span of a single lifetime or a little more, it all came down. Almost every one of those great powers fell, or was gutted or vanished entirely in a cascade of fire, and collapsed so total that historians have given it a name that sounds like the end of the world, because in a way it was. They call it the Bronze Age collapse, and it remains to this day one of the greatest and most unsettling mysteries in all of human history, because we still cannot fully explain how an entire civilized world, at the very height of its power and glory, could come apart so completely, so quickly, and so nearly all at once. That is the story we are going to move through tonight, slowly, gently, in 3 parts, the way you follow a long river down to the sea. First, the story itself, the golden world at its height, and then its terrible unraveling. We will walk through that shining, connected world and come to know it, and then we will watch it fall, city by burning city. Then, the lesson what a catastrophe like that has to teach, about how great and complex and confident things actually end. Because the way this world fell is not the way we usually imagine collapse, and there is deep and quiet wisdom in it. And finally, the pattern, the reason this 3,000-year-old ending will not quite let us go. Because it was not the first time a world ended, and it will not be the last. And the shape of it is worth knowing gently, without fear. As we drift towards sleep, you will not need to remember any of it. You are only here to be carried down the long river of a vanished world and down into sleep. So take a slow breath in and let it out longer than you took it. And let us go back past the ruin, past the fire, to the world before it fell, to the golden age of the bronze, at the very height of its glory, when no one, anywhere, imagined it could ever end. Let us go back, then, to the world at its height, a little over 3,000 years ago, to the shores and kingdoms of the eastern Mediterranean, in the last bright century before the fall. And the first thing to understand as you drift is how astonishingly connected that world already was. We tend to imagine the deep past as a scatter of isolated peoples, each alone in its own valley, knowing nothing of the wider world. But the late Bronze Age was not like that at all. It was a world of great powers in constant, intimate contact. A kind of ancient international order with kings who wrote to one another, addressed one another as brothers, sent one another lavish gifts, married into one another's families, and kept a wary, sophisticated peace across a vast and busy region. Picture the players in this great game, spread around the Eastern Sea like lamps around a dark room. To the south, mighty Egypt, ancient even then, rich beyond imagining, its pharaohs, god-kings ruling the Nile and reaching north into the lands beyond. To the north, in the highlands of Anatolia, the great and now half-forgotten empire of the Hittites, a superpower in its day, rival and equal to Egypt itself. Across the sea to the west, the palaces of Mycenaean Greece, the world of the heroes, of the tales that would one day become the Iliad, warrior kings in their citadels of great stone. Along the coast between them, the wealthy merchant kingdoms and trading cities of the Levant. And to the east, in the cradle of the two rivers, the ancient and venerable powers of Assyria and Babylon. And between all of them ceaselessly moved the ships and the caravans. This was above all a trading world, and it traded in something that gave the whole age its name, bronze. Bronze, the hard, bright metal of every tool and weapon and treasure that mattered, was made by mixing copper with tin. And here is the crucial, fragile thing: copper and tin are rarely found together. The tin, especially, came from far away, from distant mines, carried enormous distances along the trade routes. To make the bronze that armed your soldiers and equipped your farmers and adorned your kings, you needed the network. You needed the ships, the routes, the trust, the whole connected world. No kingdom, however mighty, could make its own strength alone. Everyone depended on everyone. Hold that in your mind as you sink, because it is the seed of everything that follows. A brilliant, prosperous, deeply interconnected world, the most advanced the earth had yet seen, bound together by trade so tightly that no part of it could truly stand alone. It was a marvel. It was, for its time, a kind of golden age, and its very brilliance, its very connectedness, was the hidden flaw along which it would one day break. But not yet. Tonight first, let us simply walk through it in its glory, and see how bright it was before we ever speak of the dark. Rest in the golden connected world. Rest. We know how connected that world was, and how its great ones spoke to one another, because, wonderfully, their letters survived. Buried in the archives of the ancient palaces, baked hard in clay, the correspondence of the Bronze Age kings has come down to us, and to read it is to hear the voices of that vanished world, still arguing, still bargaining, still very human. Across 3,000 years, they wrote to one another constantly, these god-kings and great kings, and they did not stand on cold ceremony. They called one another brother. The king of one great land would write to the king of another, "To my brother, thus says your brother." They inquired after one another's health and the health of one another's wives and horses and countries. They complained. Oh, how they complained. They complained that a promised shipment of gold had not arrived, or had arrived and was of poor quality. "The gold you sent was not pure, my brother. I put it in the fire and it came out less than it should have." They haggled over the bride price for a princess. They grumbled that a brother king had not written in too long, or had insulted a messenger, or had not sent the physician he had promised to lend. It is the most human thing in the world, and it dissolves 3,000 years in an instant. These are not remote and alien beings. They are rulers running a complicated world, managing alliances, trading favors, nursing grudges, exactly as the powerful have always done. There were royal marriages arranged across vast distances to seal alliances between empires. There were treaties including between Egypt and the Hittites, one of the very first recorded peace treaties in all of history, sworn after a great battle, a formal end to war between two superpowers, its text preserved on both sides. Think of what that means. This was a functioning international system. Diplomacy, treaties, trade agreements, royal marriages, a shared understanding among the great powers of how the game was played, a fragile, sophisticated web of relationships holding a whole world in a kind of order. It had taken centuries to build. It was the accumulated achievement of generation upon generation of kings and scribes and merchants, learning to live together, to trade instead of only to raid, to write instead of only to war. And every bit of it depended on the system holding, on the roads staying open, on the ships sailing safely, on the letters arriving, on the shared confidence that tomorrow would be like today. Let the voices of those kings murmur you towards sleep, brother riding to brother across the bright connected sea, complaining about the gold, arranging the marriages, keeping the great game going with no idea, none at all, that they were among the last to play it. Rest among the letters of kings, rest. If you want to hold the whole golden world in a single object, there is one, and it lay on the floor of the sea for 3,000 years off a rocky cape on the southern coast of Anatolia until divers found it in our own time. It was a ship, a merchant ship of the late Bronze Age that set out one day, fully laden and never reached its port. And what it was carrying when it went down is the golden world in miniature. Come down with me in imagination to the wreck on the seabed and see what it held. Copper, great slabs of it, ingots shaped like ox hides, dozens upon dozens of them, and tin to go with it, the exact ingredients of bronze being carried together across the sea. Glass in beautiful colored ingots, deep blue and turquoise, ebony from Africa, ivory, elephant tusks and hippopotamus teeth. Precious things from Egypt, including an object bearing the name of a famous queen. Pottery from the Greek world and from Cyprus and the coast. Jars of resin and spice, ostrich eggshells, weapons and tools and jewelry, beads of amber that had come, incredibly, all the way from the distant Baltic, the far cold north of Europe. One ship, and in its single hold, goods from Africa, from Egypt, from the Levant, from Cyprus, from Greece, from Anatolia, from the shores of the Baltic Sea, the products of a whole continent and more, gathered together and moving as a matter of ordinary business across the eastern Mediterranean. This was not treasure being hoarded. This was trade, the everyday circulation of the connected world, its arteries full of copper and tin and glass and ivory, flowing between the great powers, keeping them all supplied, keeping them all bound. And the people on that ship, the sailors, the merchant, whoever they were, went about their work with no more sense of doom than a truck driver on a motorway today. This was normal. This was the system working as it had worked for centuries. Ships like this one crossed and recrossed that sea constantly, a whole civilization's worth of them, weaving the world together with their cargoes, until the day they simply stopped. Let the sunken ship hold you as you drift, resting quiet on the pale seabed, its oxhide copper and its blue glass and its Baltic amber scattered gently in the dark. A whole golden connected world preserved in a single lost cargo. It sank by accident, this one, long before the end, an ordinary misfortune of the sea. But it stands now on the seabed of time as a perfect image of the world that was about to sink in earnest, the whole bright interconnected age, laden with the treasures of 3 continents, sailing confidently on, toward a shore it would never reach. Rest with the ship that sank, rest. Let us go now to one particular city in that golden world, the city of the scribe and his unfinished letter, because it was one of the brightest lamps of all, and knowing it will make its ending mean something. Its name was Ugarit. Ugarit stood on the coast of what is now Syria, a great and wealthy trading kingdom, one of the busiest ports of the entire ancient world. Through its harbors flowed the commerce of the connected age, the copper and the tin, the grain and the wine and the oil, the timber and the textiles and the treasures. It was a crossroads, a meeting place, a cosmopolitan city where merchants and travelers from every corner of that world came together, speaking many tongues, trading many goods, growing rich on the endless flow. And Ugarit was not only rich in gold, it was rich in words. It had a great palace, and in that palace great archives, and the scribes of Ugarit wrote in several languages, and most remarkably, they used, among other scripts, one of the earliest true alphabets in the history of the world. A set of simple wedge-shaped signs, one for each sound, that anyone could learn far more easily than the thousands of signs of the older writing systems. In the dust of Ugarit lies one of the great ancestors of the very letters you are reading these words in tonight. It was a place of merchants and of writing, of trade and of thought, as advanced and as civilized as anywhere on Earth in its day. Imagine it at its height, the busy harbor thick with ships, the warehouses full of goods from a dozen lands, the palace and its scribes bent over their tablets, recording the endless business of a great trading house. This shipment received, that debt owed, this letter to a brother king, that inventory of the royal stores. The markets, the temples, the crowded streets, the whole loud, prosperous life of a city that sat at the very center of the world's commerce and believed with every reason that it always would. This is the city whose last letter we began with tonight, the one baked in the oven, never sent, the cry for help against the ships that had come. But that is the end, and we are still in the golden time. So hold Ugarit now in its glory, bright, busy, wealthy, wise, its harbor full, its scribes at work, its alphabet being pressed into the soft clay, its people going about their prosperous lives under the warm coastal sun, with the whole connected world spread out around them like a sea of light. It was real. It was one of the finest achievements of its age, and it had no idea what was coming. Rest in Ugarit in its golden time. Rest. Let us travel now in the golden time from the warm coast up into the high, cold heart of the world to the capital of the Hittites, one of the great superpowers of the Bronze Age and one of the most completely forgotten. Its name was Hadusa, and it stood high in the rugged uplands of central Anatolia, a mountain city, a fortress of empire. The Hittites are a strange ghost in our memory. For most of history, they were entirely lost, remembered only as a name in old texts, a people no one could place. Their empire vanished so utterly that scholars doubted it had ever truly been great. And then their capital was found and dug and its archives read, and out of the ground came the astonishing truth that here had been a rival to Egypt itself, a mighty empire that ruled Anatolia and reached down into Syria, that fought the pharaohs to a standstill and then made peace with them as an equal. Come up to Hadusa in its prime. It was a city built for strength, ringed by enormous walls of stone that ran for miles over the rough terrain, following the ridges, guarded by great gates. There was a lion gate where 2 lions were carved from the living stone to guard the entrance, and a king's gate and hidden passages beneath the walls. Within stood temples and palaces and the royal archives, where thousands upon thousands of clay tablets recorded the business of empire, the laws, the treaties, the rituals, the letters, the prayers, in the wedge-shaped script of the age. The Hittite king was not merely a king. To his people, he was something close to the sun itself. They addressed him as my son, the radiant center of their world. And it was a sophisticated world up there in the mountains. The Hittites had law codes and diplomacy and a state religion of 1,000 gods and chariots that thundered across the battlefields of the age, and an intricate machinery of empire that had held for centuries. They were not barbarians on the edge of the civilized world. They were the civilized world, one of its great poles, as permanent and as mighty, to all appearances, as Egypt across the sea. Hold Hadusa in your mind as you drift the great stone walls running over the cold high ridges, the carved lions at the gate, the radiant king in his palace, the thousands of tablets in the archives recording an empire that had lasted for ages and expected to last for ages more. It was one of the pillars of the golden world, and it would be one of the first to fall so completely that it would be forgotten for 3,000 years, but not tonight. Tonight it still stands, high and strong and sure, my son upon his throne. Rest in the Hittite heart. Rest. Now cross the sea to the west, to the world of the Greek Bronze Age. the world of the great citadels and the warrior kings, and the tales that would one day, long after this world was ash, become the oldest stories of the Western imagination. This was the age of Mycenae. You may know the names even if you do not know you know them, for they echo down through Homer. Mycenae, rich in gold, Turins of the mighty walls, Pylos, sandy Pylos of the wise old king. These were the strongholds of the Mycenaean Greeks, not a single kingdom but a scatter of proud warrior realms, each ruled from its own great citadel, perched on its own commanding height, and each of them built to a scale that later Greeks, coming upon the ruins, could not believe had been raised by human hands at all. For the walls of these citadels were made of stones so enormous that the later Greeks called them Cyclopean, believing that only the Cyclopes, the one-eyed giants of legend, could possibly have lifted such blocks into place. Great rough boulders, fitted together into massive ramparts encircling the palaces on their hills. At Mycenae there was a gate crowned with two carved lions, the Lion Gate that still stands today, 3,000 years on. Behind the walls lay the palace of the king with its great hearth hall, its frescoes bright on the plastered walls, its storerooms deep with oil and wine and grain. And these Mycenaeans could write after a fashion. They kept records in a script we call Linear B, a set of signs used, as far as we can tell, almost entirely for accounting. Lists of goods, inventories of the palace stores, tallies of sheep and grain and bronze and workers, the careful bookkeeping of a palace economy. This was a world of warrior aristocrats and their retainers, of chariots and bronze arms and boar's tusk helmets, of proud kings in stone strongholds, trading and raiding across the sea, sending their ships to the ports of the whole connected world. Picture them at their height, the great citadels on their hills, the Cyclopean walls glowing in the evening light, the lions over the gate, the warrior kings feasting in their frescoed halls while the scribes tallied the stores and the ships came and went from the harbors below. This was the golden age of the Greek bronze world, the age that memory would one day transform into the shining heroic past, the age of the tales of Troy. And it too was about to end, its palaces burned, its writing lost so completely that Greece would forget how to write at all for centuries. But not tonight. Tonight the citadels stand, and the lions guard the gate, and the heroes feast in the firelight. Rest among the citadels of heroes. Rest. And now, at last, to the greatest and oldest and most confident of them all down the coast and across to the valley of the Nile, to Egypt in the age of its new kingdom, at the very summit of its power and its glory. Egypt was ancient even then. When the Bronze Age world was at its height, the pyramids of Giza were already more than 1,000 years old, as distant in the past to a Bronze Age Egyptian as the fall of Rome is to us. Egypt had endured for ages beyond counting, and it wore its antiquity like a crown. Its pharaohs were not merely kings but living gods, the sons of the sun, and they ruled a land of almost unimaginable wealth and order. The great river giving its life every year, the harvests vast, the temples and monuments rising on a scale that dwarfed anything else in the world. This was the Egypt of the mightiest pharaohs of Rameses the Great, who reigned for an age and covered the land with his colossal statues and his towering temples, who fought the Hittites at the famous battle by the river, and then made that first great peace with them. Everywhere the pharaoh built, and everywhere he carved his name and his image, huge and serene and eternal, gazing out over the river with the calm certainty of a god who cannot imagine an end. The temples at Thebes, the great columned halls, the avenues of sphinxes, the tombs cut deep into the valley of the kings, filled with treasures for an afterlife as certain as the sunrise, all of it spoke in stone of one overwhelming idea: permanence, eternity, that Egypt was and had always been and always would be. And of all the great powers of the Golden World, Egypt had the most reason for that confidence. It was the richest, the oldest, the most stable, protected by its deserts, fed by its river, ruled by its god-kings. It seemed the very definition of a thing that could not fall. If any part of that connected world was eternal, surely it was Egypt. Hold that vast, serene confidence as you drift the god-king on his throne, the colossal statues gazing over the river, the temples rising, the harvests golden, the whole ancient certainty of a land that had outlasted 1,000 years and expected to outlast 1,000 more. Egypt at the height of the Golden World, sure of its eternity. It would in the end survive the coming catastrophe, barely, battered, diminished, but alive, the one great power to stagger through. And even Egypt would come out the other side a lesser thing, its golden age broken, never quite the same again. But not tonight. Tonight it is eternal and it knows it. Rest in eternal Egypt, rest. We have walked among the kings and the citadels and the god-emperors. But the Golden World was not made of kings. It was made, as every world is, mostly of ordinary people, living ordinary days. And it is among them that I want to leave you as this first part of our journey closes, because their ordinary days are the truest measure of what was lost. So imagine, somewhere in that connected world, it hardly matters where, an ordinary day. A farmer out before the heat, tending the barley or the vines as his father did, as his father's father did, in a rhythm of seasons older than any king. A potter at her wheel, shaping the vessels that everyone needs and no one thinks about. A fisherman bringing in the morning's catch. A merchant's clerk in a busy port, checking a cargo against a list. A mother grinding grain, a child running in a dusty lane, an old man dozing in the shade of a wall. The small, warm, unremarkable texture of ordinary life going on as it had gone on for centuries in a world that worked. And that is the thing to feel, that it worked. For these ordinary people, the great connected world was not an abstraction. It was simply the water they swam in. The trade meant the goods in the market. The peace between the great kings meant the roads were safe and the harvests were not burned. The system meant that a farmer could plant in the spring with reasonable confidence of reaping in the autumn, that a merchant could send a cargo and expect it to arrive, that a child born this year would grow up in a world much like this one. Stability, continuity, the quiet, precious, invisible gift of a world that holds together. They did not think about it any more than we think about the vast systems that bring the food to our shelves and the light to our rooms. It was simply there, the way the ground is there, the way the sky is there, permanent, assumed, beneath all notice. Nobody on that ordinary day lay awake wondering whether the whole world might come apart. Why would they? It had held for centuries. It would hold forever. Hold that ordinary day gently as you sink towards sleep, the farmer in his field, the potter at her wheel, the child in the lane, the whole warm, unremarkable life of a world that worked, going on under the golden sun, with no shadow on it anywhere. This is the world. This is what was real and good and precious about it. This is what a whole civilization of ordinary people had built and inherited and taken for granted. Remember it. as you drift the ordinary day in the golden world. Because it is here, exactly here in the middle of the ordinary and the assumed and the permanent, that the shadow is about to fall. But not tonight. Tonight the day is golden and ordinary and whole. Rest in it, rest. The end did not come all at once out of a clear sky. It rarely does. Before the great fall there were cracks, small at first, easy to explain away, easy to survive one at a time. Let us watch them appear, gently in the golden world, the way the people living in it must have watched them, with concern but not yet with terror. The letters change in the last decades. If you read the correspondence of the great kings across those final years, a new note creeps in, a note of strain. There are letters about hunger. A great king writes urgently to another, begging for grain, for shipments of food, saying that his people are starving, that it is a matter of life and death. This from the rulers of a world that had fed itself in abundance for centuries. Something was going wrong with the harvests. Somewhere the golden fields were failing. There are letters about raiders, complaints of ships appearing where they should not, of coasts being troubled, of enemies on the sea. There are hints of unrest within the kingdoms too, of trouble on the roads, of the machinery of order beginning, here and there, to slip. A king writes anxiously about missing shipments, about a world growing less reliable, less safe, less certain than it had been. The confident tone of brother writing to brother begins in places to fray into worry, and none of it taken alone was the end of the world. A bad harvest is a bad harvest. There had been bad harvests before, and the world had survived them. A raid is a raid. There had always been raiders somewhere. Unrest passes. Shipments are delayed and then arrive. Each crack by itself was survivable, explicable, ordinary. The people of the golden world did what people always do with early warnings. They coped, they adapted, they told themselves it was a rough patch. They trusted that the great system which had held for so long would hold again. But the cracks were multiplying, and they were beginning quietly to connect. A failing harvest here meant hunger there, which meant people on the move, which meant pressure on the borders, which meant soldiers pulled away from other tasks, which meant the roads a little less safe, which meant trade a little more disrupted, which meant the failing harvest could not be relieved by grain from elsewhere. The very connectedness that had made the world so rich was beginning slowly to work the other way, to pass trouble along its threads instead of goods, so that a problem in one place became a problem everywhere. Let the first cracks appear gently in the dark, as you drift, small, survivable, easy to explain, spreading quietly through a golden world that did not yet know it was beginning to fail. Rest in the last calm before the storm. Rest. And now out of the haze of that troubled time comes the great and terrible mystery, the shadow that falls across every account of the collapse, the enemy whose name we still cannot fully explain. Egypt called them simply the peoples of the sea. We call them still the sea peoples. And no one to this day knows entirely who they were. We know of them mostly from Egypt, because Egypt survived to carve its version in stone. On the walls of a great temple, the pharaoh recorded a mighty struggle against a coalition of these sea peoples, a confederation of different groups with different names, come together and fallen upon the civilized world like a wave. The Egyptian texts describe them sweeping down from the north, overwhelming land after land. No land could stand before their arms. One inscription says, and it names the great powers they had already destroyed, a roll call of the fallen before they ever reached Egypt's own borders. But here is the strange and haunting thing. the detail that turns them from mere raiders into something far more unsettling. In the carved scenes of the great battle, the sea peoples are not shown only as warriors in ships. They are shown with ox carts, with wagons piled high with belongings, with women and children. These were not simply pirates come to plunder and sail away. This was a migration, whole peoples on the move, families and all, carrying everything they owned, looking not merely for loot but for somewhere to go. Something had uprooted them from wherever they came from and set them wandering in their thousands toward the rich lands of the south and east, driven by a desperation we can feel but cannot fully name. And that is the heart of the mystery. Who were they? Where did they come from? What drove them from their own homes and set them adrift upon the world? The theories are many that they came from the Aegean, from the coasts and islands of the Greek world, from western Anatolia, from the central Mediterranean, from lands whose own troubles we cannot see. Some think they were themselves victims first, peoples already displaced by the same failing harvests and collapsing order, refugees turned raiders, the collapse in one place spilling out to become the collapse in another. Others think they were more a symptom than a cause, a name Egypt gave to the general chaos, the human face of a disaster with many roots. Let them remain for tonight what they truly are, a mystery moving across the dark water. A great wandering host of the uprooted, come from somewhere we cannot see, driven by some catastrophe behind them, falling upon the golden world in its hour of weakness. Whoever they were part of the ending, whether as its cause or its consequence or both at once. Watch their ox carts and their ships move slowly across the troubled sea in the dark from a great and safe distance, and do not fear them. They have been dust for 3,000 years. Their story is only a story now. Rest as the sea peoples come. Rest. And now we return to where we began the night, to Ugarit, the bright and busy city of the scribe and his unsent letter. For its hour has come. And in its fall we can see, more clearly than anywhere else, exactly how the golden world came apart. Ugarit did not fall because it was weak or backward or poor. It fell at the height of its wealth and sophistication, a great trading capital connected to everything. And that connection, in the end, was its doom. For Ugarit's strength lay in its ships and its trade and the wider system it belonged to, and when that wider system began to fail, when the enemy came upon the sea, Ugarit found its own defenses fairly thin. Its fleet, its soldiers were away, serving the obligations of the connected world, sent off to help defend allies elsewhere or watching distant coasts. The city itself was left exposed. And so we come to those last letters, the most haunting documents of the whole collapse. Baked in the fire of Ugarit's destruction, found in the ruins 3,000 years later, they are the final words of a dying city, frozen at the moment of its end. In one, the king writes in desperation of enemy ships that have already come, that have already burned his towns and done evil in his land. In another, a plea for help, a warning to watch the coast. And in that one we began with, the king crying that his troops and his ships are all elsewhere, that the land is left to itself, that the enemy has appeared and there is no one to stop them. My cities were burned, and they did evil things in my country. Does my brother not know that all my troops are stationed in the land of the Hittites and all my ships are in the land of Lucca? The land is abandoned to itself. And then silence, the letter never sent, the city burned. And here is the fact that makes Ugarit's fall so final, so total. It was never rebuilt. Other cities destroyed in the collapse were sometimes reoccupied, patched, lived in again by poorer people in humbler ways. But Ugarit, great, rich, cosmopolitan Ugarit, with its harbors and its palaces and its alphabet, was abandoned utterly. The fire took it, and the survivors fled, and no one ever came back to live there. It simply ceased to be, and the sand and the centuries covered it, and it was forgotten, its very name lost, until the archaeologists came and read its last words baked in the ash. Let Ugarit's ending be gentle in the telling, as you drift, for it is 3,000 years gone and cannot touch you. A bright city, a great achievement of its age, caught undefended when the system that had made it strong turned suddenly into the thing that left it helpless and gone in a single burning forever. Rest as the fires close over Ugarit. Its people are long at peace. Its last letter has been read at last by us tonight. Rest, and Ugarit was not alone. Across the whole of that connected world in those same terrible decades, the great powers were going down, one after another, like lamps blown out along a darkening shore. Come north again to the high, cold heart of the world, to Hadusa, the mighty Hittite capital, the empire that had rivaled Egypt itself. For its ending is the strangest of all. The Hittite Empire in its last years was under enormous strain, the same strains we have watched spreading everywhere. There is a Hittite letter from near the end that speaks of famine, a desperate plea for grain to be sent by ship, quickly, urgently. It is a matter of life and death. The great empire was starving, its trade was failing, enemies pressed on its borders. The machinery that had held Anatolia for centuries was grinding to a halt. And then Hadusa fell, and here is the mystery within the mystery. When the archaeologists dug the great capital, they expected to find it destroyed suddenly, in war, full of the treasures and the valuables of a city taken by surprise. Instead, they found something stranger and sadder. The city seems to have been, in large part, abandoned before the end. The valuables were gone, carried away, it seems, by the people themselves. The royal archives, the sacred things, removed. And then the emptied city was burned, as though the Hittites, in their final extremity, had simply given up on their own capital, packed what they could, taken their gods and their records, and walked away from the mountain fortress that had been the heart of their world for ages, leaving it to the flames. And after that, nothing. The Hittite Empire did not fall and rise again. It did not shrink into a smaller kingdom. It simply vanished. The great power that had fought Egypt to a standstill, that had ruled Anatolia and reached into Syria, that had seemed as permanent as the mountains it was built among. It evaporated so completely from the memory of the world that, as we said, for 3,000 years no one even believed it had truly existed. An entire civilization, one of the superpowers of its age, gone so thoroughly that it had to be rediscovered from the ground up, like a dream that everyone had forgotten. There is something almost peaceful in the completeness of it, if you let there be here in the dark, not a heroic last stand, not a blaze of final glory, just an empire quietly running out of everything it needed, and its people gathering what they could and walking away into the dark, and the great walls standing empty, and the fire, and then the long silence of the forgotten. Rest as the Hittite Empire vanishes into the mountains and the ages. It is at peace now. It has been at peace a very long time. Rest. And across the sea to the west, in the same dark decades, the citadels of the heroes were burning too. The great Mycenaean world, the Cyclopean walls, the Lion Gate, the warrior kings in their frescoed halls, was coming down into fire and ruin. One by one, the great palaces of the Greek Bronze Age were destroyed. Pylos, sandy Pylos of the wise old king, was burned, and in its ruins, baked hard in the fire that took it, were found the last clay tablets of its scribes, the final accounts of a doomed palace. Among them, some scholars believe, are records of desperate measures, watchers posted along the coast, offerings made to the gods, a kingdom bracing against a threat it could see coming and could not stop. And then the fire and the tablets baked in it, frozen forever at the moment of the end, exactly as at Ugarit, the last bookkeeping of a world about to die. And the others fell too, or emptied, or shrank into ruin. The mighty citadels, whose walls the later Greeks thought only giants could have raised, were abandoned or burned. The palace system, the whole intricate machinery of warrior kings and scribes and stores and trade, collapsed. And with it went something we might not expect, writing itself. The Mycenaeans had kept their careful accounts in Linear B, and when the palaces that used that script fell, the script fell with them. The Greeks forgot how to write. For centuries, for 400 years and more, there would be no writing at all in the Greek world. An entire civilization lost its literacy, and did not regain it for the length of time that separates us from the age of great sailing ships. This was the beginning of what later ages would call a dark age, a long, dim, impoverished stretch after the collapse, when the great cities were gone, and the trade had withered, and the population had fallen, and the memory of the golden world survived only as legend. The Greeks of that dark age and of the ages after would look at the ruined Cyclopean walls and the empty citadels and tell stories of a lost age of heroes, greater than themselves, who had lived before some great catastrophe, half remembering in the shape of myth the very world we have watched fall tonight. The tales of Troy, of Mycenae, of the heroes and their doom, are the golden world's own dim memory of its ending, carried down through the dark on the breath of poets who could no longer even write. Let the citadels burn quietly in the dark, as you drift the Lion Gate, the great walls, the frescoed halls all going down into fire and then into ruin and then into legend, the last tablets baking in the flames, the writing itself passing out of the world. It is an ending, yes, but it is 3,000 years old, and it became, in time, the most beautiful stories our civilization ever told. Nothing is only lost. Rest as the citadels of the heroes pass into the long dark and the longer song. Rest. Step back now for a moment from the individual cities and see the whole thing at once, from above, the way we can and the people living through it never could. Because the truly staggering thing about the Bronze Age collapse is not that any single city fell. Cities had always fallen. It is that they all fell, very nearly all of them, across a vast region within the span of a single lifetime. Draw the map in your mind, that whole bright connected world around the Eastern Sea, and then watch the lamps go out. Ugarit burned and abandoned. Hadusa emptied and burned, the Hittite Empire simply gone. The Mycenaean citadels of Greece destroyed one after another and writing lost. Cities all along the coast of the Levant sacked and ruined. Trade routes severed. Kingdoms erased. In roughly the years around and after 1,200 years before our own era, a wave of destruction rolled across the entire civilized world of that region, and when it had passed, that world was simply gone. Not damaged, not diminished. Gone. Of all the great powers of the Golden Age, only Egypt would stagger through, and even Egypt would emerge broken. The others, the Hittites, the Mycenaeans, the great trading cities, did not merely suffer a setback. They ceased to exist as what they had been. The whole intricate system, the whole network of powers and trade and writing and order that had taken centuries to build, came apart in decades, and much of it would take centuries more to be rebuilt, and some of it was never rebuilt at all. This is what makes the Bronze Age collapse one of history's supreme mysteries. A single city falls to a single enemy that we understand, but a whole interconnected civilization, at the height of its power, coming apart nearly simultaneously across thousands of miles, that is something else. That is not an event. That is a systemic failure, a collapse of the whole, and it demands a different kind of explanation. Not who conquered them, but what could possibly bring down everything, everywhere, all at once. And the honest answer, which scholars have circled for a century and are only now beginning to agree upon, is both unsatisfying and profound. There was no single cause. There was no one enemy, no one disaster, no one villain. Instead, there were many troubles arriving together, each making the others worse, until the whole system, too complex, too connected, too finely balanced, simply could not hold. Let that great overhead view settle over you as you drift, the whole map of the golden world, and the lamps going dark across it, one after another, in the span of a single human life. It is the largest ending we have spoken of yet, and it had many causes woven together. Let us look at them gently one by one. Rest. The first of the great causes was written not in any human record, but in the mud of ancient lakes and the pollen of vanished forests and the chemistry of old cave stones, and only in our own time have we learned to read it. It is this. In the very decades the world was falling, the climate turned against it. The rains failed. A great drought settled over the eastern Mediterranean and would not lift. The evidence comes from the patient sciences of the earth. From cores drilled deep into the beds of ancient lakes and seas, scientists can read the pollen that settled there year by year, and the pollen tells of a land drying out, the trees and the moisture-loving plants giving way to the plants of the parched and the barren. From other records in caves and sediments comes the same story, again and again, across the whole region, that around the time of the collapse and for a long stretch after, the world grew hotter and drier, and the reliable rains that fed the harvest simply stopped coming as they had. And remember what we heard in the letters, the pleas for grain, the talk of famine, the desperate shipments of food. Those were not exaggerations. Those were the human voice of the drought, harvest after harvest failing, granaries emptying, the great populations of the cities, grown large and dependent on reliable food, beginning to go hungry. And hunger in a crowded and complex world is never only hunger, it is unrest. It is people abandoning their fields and their homes and taking to the roads. It is desperation and movement and the fraying of every bond that a full belly had held together. Think of what a long drought does to a civilization built, as all civilizations are, on food. Everything rests on the harvest, the cities, the armies, the trade, the temples, the kings, all of it fed in the end by grain in the ground. Withhold the rain for a generation, and you do not merely make people hungry. You pull the foundation out from under everything. The soldiers cannot be fed. The trade cannot be sustained. The order cannot be kept. And the people, driven by the oldest desperation there is, begin to move, which may be, some think, exactly what set the sea peoples themselves wandering. Refugees of the same drought that was starving everyone become raiders in their turn. Let the great drought settle over the world in your mind, slow and vast and merciless. Not a storm, not a battle, but simply the sky withholding the rain year after year, drying the fields, emptying the granaries, setting the hungry world in motion. It was one of the deep engines of the fall, and it came, as such things do, without malice, without meaning, simply the turning of a climate that neither knew nor cared what it undid. Rest under the dry and pitiless sky of the dying world. It rains again in the end. It always does in the end, but not for a long, long while. Rest. And there was a second great cause, and it came from below, from the deep, restless plates of the earth itself. For the eastern Mediterranean is a land of earthquakes, sitting where great sections of the world's crust grind slowly against one another. And in the very decades of the collapse, it seems, the earth shook again and again. Some scholars speak of an earthquake storm, the idea that a great fault system, once it begins to slip, can unleash not one earthquake but a whole sequence of them, over years and decades, as the strain releases in place after place along its length. And when the archaeologists dug the ruined cities of the collapse, they found in many of them the signature of exactly this: walls thrown down in ways that fire and war do not throw them. Columns toppled all in the same direction. Buildings collapsed as if shaken from beneath. Human remains crushed under fallen stone. City after city, up and down that quaking coast, bears the marks of the earth heaving in those terrible years. Imagine the great citadels and the walled cities, already strained by drought and hunger and the pressure of enemies, and then the ground itself begins to move. The cyclopean walls that no army could breach, cracked and thrown down by the shaking earth, the palaces collapsing, the harbors ruined, the fragile machinery of a complex society, its storehouses, its defenses, its very buildings broken open, again and again, by a force no king could treaty with and no army could fight. An earthquake does not merely kill. It shatters the physical shell of a civilization in an afternoon and leaves it exposed and reeling and unable to rebuild before the next blow falls. And here is the terrible thing, the thing that turns these separate disasters into a single doom. None of them came alone. The drought weakened the world, and then the earthquakes shattered it, and then the sea peoples fell upon the ruins, and each disaster made a people less able to withstand the next. A city might have survived a drought in a stable world. It might have rebuilt after an earthquake, in a peaceful one. It might have fought off raiders if it were whole and fed and standing. But drought and earthquake and raider and famine and the failing of trade all together in the same handful of decades, no city, however great, could stand against all of it at once. Let the shaking earth be gentle in the telling, for it is 3,000 years stilled. The great fault slipped, and the cities fell, and the trembling passed long ago into the deep quiet of the settled ground. The earth that shook the golden world to pieces has slept beneath that same coast for 3,000 peaceful years. Rest upon it as it rests. The shaking is over. It was over before any city we will ever know was built. Rest. And so we come to the deepest answer to the great mystery, the answer that has slowly emerged as the truest one, and that is, in its way, more unsettling than any single villain could ever be. The Bronze Age world did not fall because of the drought, or the earthquakes, or the sea peoples, or the famine, or the failing trade. It fell because of all of them together, a perfect storm of calamities, striking a system too complex and too connected to absorb them. This is what scholars now call a system's collapse, and it is worth understanding gently in the dark because it is one of the most important ideas the deep past has to teach. A simple society, a scatter of independent villages, each feeding itself, each standing alone, is remarkably hard to destroy all at once because there is no all. Ruin one village and the next goes on untouched. But a complex, connected, interdependent civilization is a different kind of thing entirely. Its very strength, the trade, the specialization, the way each part depends on all the others, is also hidden within it, a terrible fragility. Because when the parts depend on one another, a failure in one part does not stay in one part. It spreads, follow the cascade slowly as it must have run. The drought fails the harvests. The failing harvests starve the cities and set the hungry wandering. The wandering peoples press on the borders and take to the sea as raiders. The raiders cut the trade routes. The cut trade routes mean no tin, and no tin means no bronze, and no bronze means no weapons and no tools. It also means no grain shipped from lands that still have it to lands that have none. Because the ships that carried grain are the same ships the raiders have driven from the sea. And meanwhile, the earthquakes shatter the cities that might have weathered the rest. And each failure deepens every other in a spiral until the whole magnificent interconnected system, which no single blow could have felled, comes apart under the weight of all the blows at once, like a great tree that stood through 100 storms and falls at last when the drought has rotted its roots and the earthquake has cracked its trunk and the wind on an ordinary day gives it the final push. There is no villain in this. That is the hard and profound truth of it. No one destroyed the Bronze Age world. It was not conquered. It was not, in the end, even mainly a story of enemies at all. It was a story of a system, brilliant, prosperous, sophisticated, and fatally overconnected, meeting more shocks than it was built to bear, and doing what all such systems do when they are pushed past their limit. It cascaded. It unraveled. It came apart along the very threads that had made it strong. Let that great, quiet, terrible understanding settle over you as you drift toward the deep part of the night. Not a single cause, but a convergence. Not an enemy, but a storm. A whole world brought down not by any one thing, but by everything arriving together on a system too intricate to survive it. It is the answer to the mystery. And it is, as we will see, a lesson that reaches far beyond that ancient sea. But that is for later. For now, only rest in the calm after the perfect storm, which blew itself out 3,000 years ago and cannot reach you here. Rest. And so we come to the deepest answer to the great mystery. The answer that has slowly emerged as the truest one. And that is, in its way, more unsettling than any single villain could ever be. The Bronze Age world did not fall because of the drought, or the earthquakes, or the sea peoples, or the famine, or the failing trade. It fell because of all of them together, a perfect storm of calamities, striking a system too complex and too connected to absorb them. This is what scholars now call a system's collapse, and it is worth understanding gently in the dark because it is one of the most important ideas the deep past has to teach. A simple society, a scatter of independent villages, each feeding itself, each standing alone, is remarkably hard to destroy all at once because there is no all. Ruin one village and the next goes on untouched. But a complex, connected, Interdependent civilization is a different kind of thing entirely. Its very strength, the trade, the specialization, the way each part depends on all the others, is also hidden within it a terrible fragility. Because when the parts depend on one another, a failure in one part does not stay in one part. It spreads. Follow the cascade slowly as it must have run. The drought fails the harvests. The failing harvests starve the cities and set the hungry wandering. The wandering peoples press on the borders and take to the sea as raiders. The raiders cut the trade routes. The cut trade routes mean no tin, and no tin means no bronze, and no bronze means no weapons and no tools. It also means no grain shipped from lands that still have it to lands that have none, because the ships that carried grain are the same ships the raiders have driven from the sea. And meanwhile, the earthquakes shatter the cities that might have weathered the rest, and each failure deepens every other in a spiral, until the whole magnificent interconnected system, which no single blow could have felled, comes apart under the weight of all the blows at once, like a great tree that stood through 100 storms and falls at last when the drought has rotted its roots, and the earthquake has cracked its trunk, and the wind, on an ordinary day, gives it the final push. There is no villain in this. That is the hard and profound truth of it. No one destroyed the Bronze Age world. It was not conquered. It was not, in the end, even mainly a story of enemies at all. It was a story of a system, brilliant, prosperous, sophisticated, and fatally overconnected, meeting more shocks than it was built to bear, and doing what all such systems do when they are pushed past their limit. It cascaded. It unraveled. It came apart along the very threads that had made it strong. Let that great, quiet, terrible understanding settle over you as you drift toward the deep part of the night. Not a single cause, but a convergence. Not an enemy, but a storm. A whole world brought down not by any one thing, but by everything arriving together on a system too intricate to survive it. It is the answer to the mystery. And it is, as we will see, a lesson that reaches far beyond that ancient sea. But that is for later. For now, only rest in the calm after the perfect storm, which blew itself out 3,000 years ago and cannot reach you here. Rest. And after the fall came the dark, a long, dim, diminished age that settled over the ruins of the golden world and did not lift for centuries. It is one of the great silences of history, and it is a strangely peaceful thing to move through gently in the deep of the night. Picture the world in the generations after the collapse. The great cities, most of them, are gone, burned, abandoned. Their populations scattered or dead. The trade that had bound the world together is broken. The ships no longer cross the sea in their multitudes. The copper and the tin and the ivory and the amber no longer flow. The writing in many places is simply lost in Greece, forgotten entirely for centuries. The great kings are gone, and the empires and the whole intricate machinery of the connected age. Where there were cities of thousands, there are now villages of dozens. Where there were palaces, there are ruins already half legend. The people who lived in that long dark were poorer and fewer and smaller in every way than their ancestors. They lived among the ruins of a greatness they could no longer match or even understand. They looked at the Cyclopean walls and could not imagine how they had been built. They told stories of a lost age of heroes, mightier than themselves, who had lived before the world broke. They had come down in the world and they knew it, and the knowing must have sat over everything like a long gray dusk. And yet life went on. That is the quiet truth of every dark age, and it is worth holding gently. The world did not end. People still planted and harvested and married and raised children and told stories by the fire and buried their dead and looked up at the same stars. In the villages among the ruins, ordinary life continued, humbler but unbroken, the deep rhythms of human existence carrying on beneath the ruin of the great systems that had once organized them. The golden world was gone, but the human world remained, patient and enduring in the long, dim quiet after the fall. Let the long dark settle over you softly, not as horror, but as a great quiet, a world grown small and simple and hushed after the roar of the golden age, the ruins standing silent under the stars, the humble villages tending their fires, life going on diminished but alive, waiting without knowing it for the light to slowly return. Rest in the long dark. It is a gentler place than the fall, and it does not last forever. Nothing does rest. Before we leave the story and turn in the last part of our night to what it means, let us pause quietly and reckon with the sheer scale of what was lost in that collapse, because only in feeling the loss can we feel the weight of the lesson. What went down in those few decades was not just cities and kings. It was a whole way of being in the world. Centuries of accumulated achievement, the diplomacy, the trade networks, the shared arts, the technologies, the intricate specializations of a complex civilization, all of it unwound. Knowledge was lost. Skills that had been passed hand to hand for generations died with the people who held them and had to be painfully reinvented or were simply gone forever. Whole languages fell silent. Whole peoples vanished from the earth so completely that we did not know, until we dug them up, that they had ever existed. And perhaps the most poignant loss of all, the writing. Think of it. In Greece, for 400 years and more, no one could write. A civilization that had kept careful records, that had a script and scribes and archives, simply forgot how to do it and did not remember for the length of time that separates us from the Renaissance. Everything that writing preserves, the accounts, the laws, the letters, the stories, the memory of a people, went dark and stayed dark for ages. When the Greeks learned to write again, at last, centuries later, it was with a new alphabet, borrowed and remade, and their own past before the dark had become pure myth, a golden age of heroes and gods that they could no longer distinguish from history. And yet, even here, in the very heart of the loss, there is the thread that runs through all our nights, the truth that nothing is ever only lost. For out of that collapse, out of the very failure of the bronze trade, came iron. When the long trade routes broke and the tin could no longer be had, people turned to a metal that could be found closer to home, iron, harder to work but far more common. And in learning to master it, they opened the age that would follow, the Iron Age, and everything it would build. The collapse of the Bronze Age was also the birth of the world that came after it. The ending was also a beginning. It always is. Let the full weight of the loss rest gently on you now, in the dark, and beside it the quiet consolation. A whole golden world with all its brilliance and all its achievement, unmade in the span of a life. And yet, from its ashes, in time, new things, iron, and new alphabets and new peoples, and at last new civilizations. including the ones that would give us the very memory of the loss. Nothing was only lost. Everything that fell became, in time, the ground that something new grew from. Rest at the end of the story in the strange peace of that. We have watched a world die. Now gently let us ask what it has to teach. But first only rest, rest. We have walked through the whole story now, the golden world and its terrible unraveling. Let us turn in this last part of our night to what it means. And the first lesson, the deepest one, is about the strange and counterintuitive way that great and complex things actually fall. Because it is almost never the way we imagine. When we picture the fall of a civilization, we picture a single dramatic cause, an invincible army at the gates, a tyrant's madness, a great battle lost. We want a villain, a moment, a clean story of cause and effect, and sometimes history obliges. But the deepest collapses, the ones that take down not a city but a whole world, are almost never like that. They are like the Bronze Age collapse, no single cause, no single villain, but a cascade. A system, grown complex and interdependent and finely balanced, meeting more stress than it can absorb and coming apart along its own internal connections, each failure triggering the next. There is a quiet truth here that the deep past knows and we keep forgetting. The more complex and connected a thing becomes, the more ways it has to fail, and the faster a failure can spread through it. A simple thing fails simply in one place and stops. A complex thing fails in cascades, one part pulling down the next, which pulls down the next, until the collapse runs faster than anyone can respond to it. The very sophistication that makes a system powerful also makes its collapse, when it comes, swift and total and strangely unstoppable, because there is no simple part left that can stand alone when the whole begins to go. And this is why such collapses feel, to those living through them, less like a battle and more like a bewilderment. There is no clear enemy to fight. There is just everything going wrong at once in ways that connect and compound faster than anyone can understand, let alone fix. The harvest fails and the raiders come and the earth shakes and the trade stops and the grain does not arrive and the soldiers are unpaid and the city cannot hold. And each of these makes the others worse. And there is no single thread you could cut to stop it, because it is not a single thread. It is the whole weave unraveling. Let that understanding rest gently over you as you drift, not as a fear, but as a kind of hard-won wisdom the deep past is offering you. Great things do not usually fall to a single blow. They fall when too many small stresses converge on a system too complex to absorb them and cascade. It is how the Bronze Age world fell. It is, in truth, how most great and complex things fall. To know it is not to be frightened by it. It is only to see at last clearly how the world actually works, and there is a strange calm in clear sight, even of hard things. Rest in the clear, cool understanding of how complex things fall. Rest. Here is the second lesson, and it is the most humbling of all and the gentlest to hold in the dark. The people who lived through the Bronze Age collapse did not know it was happening, not until it was far too late. From inside the falling world, it did not look like the fall of a world at all. It looked like a run of bad luck. Think back to the ordinary day we rested in, the farmer, the potter, the child in the lane, the whole warm assumed permanence of the golden world. Now run time forward for them slowly. The first bad harvest comes. Hard, but harvests fail. It will be better next year. Some raiders trouble the coast. Worrying, but there have always been raiders. Prices rise. A shipment is late. A distant city is said to have had trouble. Each thing alone is survivable, explicable, ordinary. And so the people do what people always do. They cope. They adapt. They tell themselves it is a rough patch. They trust that the great system which has held for centuries will hold again. Nobody wakes up one morning and thinks, today the world begins to end. There is no such morning. There is only a long series of ordinary bad days, each one explicable, each one survived, each one making the next a little worse. Until looking back from very far away, we can see that somewhere in that long series of ordinary bad days, the world was ending and no one inside it could tell. The scribe writing his last letter did not know it was the last letter. He thought he was writing an urgent message about a serious but survivable crisis. He thought help might come. He thought there would be a next letter. There was not. This is not a failure of intelligence. The people of the golden world were as clever as we are. It is something deeper, and it is built into all of us, the deep human assumption that tomorrow will be like today, that the world we know is the world that will go on, that the ground beneath us is solid because it has always been solid. It is a necessary assumption. We could not live without it. You cannot function if you truly believe the world might end at any moment. But it means that the very largest changes, the ones that unfold slowly across a lifetime, are the ones we are least able to see while they are happening. We see the single dramatic event. We are blind to the slow cascade. We only ever recognize the fall of a world afterward when we are standing in the ruins or reading, 3,000 years later, a letter that was never sent. Let that be a gentle humility to rest on, not a fear. No one ever sees it coming, not because they are foolish, but because they are human, living inside their own moment, trusting the ground beneath them as we all must. The people of the golden world were not warned and did not know and coped and hoped and were overtaken. There is a deep tenderness in that across the 3,000 years, a kinship with everyone who has ever lived inside a change too large to see. You are inside your own moment too, as they were inside theirs. And that is not a thing to fear tonight. It is only a thing to hold gently, with compassion for them, and for yourself, and to rest within. Rest. And here is the third lesson, the strangest and most beautiful and most double-edged of them all. The very thing that made the golden world great was the very thing that destroyed it. Its strength and its weakness were the same thing, seen from two sides. And that thing was connection. Remember how we began with the wonder of the connected world, the ships and the letters and the trade. The great powers bound together in a web of exchange so rich that no kingdom could stand alone. That connection was the golden world's genius. It was what made it prosperous, sophisticated, advanced beyond anything before it. Because everyone traded with everyone, everyone had more than they could have made alone. The tin from far away that made the bronze, the grain shipped from lands of plenty to lands of want, the ideas and the arts and the technologies flowing along the same routes as the goods. Connection made them rich. Connection made them mighty. Connection was the whole secret of the golden age, and connection was exactly what killed them. Because a web that carries goods in the good times carries collapse in the bad times. The same routes that brought the tin brought the raiders. The same interdependence that let each kingdom specialize and prosper meant that no kingdom could feed or arm or defend itself alone when the web broke. When the trade failed, everyone failed together, because everyone had built their strength on everyone else. The connection that had lifted them all up became the chain that dragged them all down. Their greatest achievement and their fatal flaw were not two different things. They were one thing, the connectedness itself. That gave in the good times and took in the bad. There is something profound in that and worth resting on, because it is true of so much more than one ancient world. The things that make us strong are so often the very things that make us vulnerable. The deep bonds that give a life its meaning are the same bonds whose breaking gives it its deepest grief. The openness that lets in love is the same openness that lets in loss. To be connected to a person, to a world, to a system is always inescapably to be exposed to its ending. There is no strength without a matching fragility, no connection without a matching risk. It is not a flaw to be fixed. It is simply the deep shape of things. Let that great double truth settle over you gently as the night deepens, that the golden world's strength and weakness were one. That connection is always both a gift and a danger. That the very things that lift us up are the things that can bring us down, and that this is not a mistake in the design of the world but the truth at the heart of it. There is a deep peace in accepting that rather than fighting it. The Bronze Age world was great because it was connected, and it fell because it was connected, and both were true and both were beautiful. And there is nothing to be done about it but to love the connection while it lasts, and to understand without fear that all connected things are mortal. Rest in that whole and difficult and peaceful truth. Rest. And so we come to the pattern. The reason this 3,000-year-old ending will not quite let us go. The reason it feels less like a story about them and more like a story about all of us. Because the Bronze Age collapse was not a freak, not a one-time accident of history. It was one turning of a wheel that has turned and turned and turned again, all through the human story. We are not the first. That is the great quiet refrain that runs beneath all of these nights, beneath the drowned city and the buried temple and now the fallen golden world. Again and again across the ages, great and confident civilizations have risen and flourished and believed themselves eternal and fallen. The Bronze Age world fell. Later, Rome, vast, mighty, sure of its endless dominion, fell too, and a long dark age followed it, so like the one after the bronze that they rhyme across the centuries. The Maya in their jungle cities rose and fell. The great civilizations of the Indus, of Angkor, of Easter Island, of 100 places whose names we know and 1,000 whose names we have lost, rose and shone and fell, and the shapes of their falls rhyme. Not identical, history never repeats exactly, but rhyming. A society grows complex and prosperous and confident. It builds up its intricate systems, its dependencies, its assumptions of permanence. It reaches a peak of brilliance, and then some convergence of stresses, climate, or overreach, or the failing of the systems it had come to depend on, or simply the accumulated weight of its own complexity, pushes it past what it can bear, and it cascades and comes down, often faster than anyone thought possible. And a quieter, humbler age follows until in time something new rises from the ruins. Rise, shine, fall, dark, rise again. It is the oldest rhythm in the human story, older than any single civilization, as old as complexity itself. There is something that could be frightening in that if you let it be. But lie here in the dark and feel instead how it can be the opposite. To know that we are not the first is to be freed from a kind of loneliness. Every civilization that ever fell believed, right up until the end, that it was the exception, the eternal one, the one that history's rules did not apply to. And every one of them was wrong. And in being wrong together across all the ages, they become a kind of vast company, the whole long procession of human worlds, each one bright and confident and mortal, rising and falling in the same ancient rhythm, all of them our ancestors, all of them our kin. Let that great procession move through the dark as you drift, world after world after world, each one golden in its hour, each one sure of its permanence, each one falling in its turn, and each one giving rise in time to the next. We are not the first. We are the latest turning of a very old wheel. And there is not fear in that, but a strange belonging to be part of the oldest rhythm there is, the long human dance of rise and fall and rise again that has been turning since the very beginning and will turn long after us. Rest in the great company of the fallen and the risen. You are not alone and you are not the first. Rest. It is impossible, of course, to walk through the fall of that connected world and not feel it turn at some point into a mirror. So let us look into it gently and honestly and without fear, because there is a way to hold this thought that brings not anxiety but a deep and useful peace. For we, too, live in a golden and connected world, more connected by far than anything the Bronze Age ever dreamed. Our tin comes from farther away than theirs ever did, and our grain and our metals, and our medicines, and the thousand intricate things that fill our ordinary days, woven together into a global web of such staggering complexity that no single person understands even a fraction of it. We, too, live inside a system so vast and so interdependent that we take its workings utterly for granted: the food that appears on the shelf, the light that comes at the flick of a switch, the goods from every corner of the earth arriving as a matter of course. We, too, assume, as they did, that tomorrow will be like today, that the ground beneath us is solid, that our world, whatever its troubles, will simply go on. And the honest truth, the Bronze Age offers us without cruelty across 3,000 years, is that they thought so too. They were not less clever than us. They were not less advanced for their time. They simply could not see from inside their own moment the slow convergence that would undo them. And we cannot fully see ours either. That is not a prophecy of doom. It is only a humility, a reminder that no world is exempt, that connection is always both a strength and an exposure, that the assumption of permanence is the one assumption every fallen civilization shared. But here is why this mirror need not frighten you tonight in the dark. Because seeing it clearly is itself the only protection there has ever been. The Bronze Age world could not learn from a collapse it had never witnessed. We can. We are the first civilization in history that can look back across the whole long record of rise and fall, and see the pattern, and know the shape of the danger. That knowledge does not make us immune. Nothing makes anyone immune, but it makes us aware, and awareness is not nothing. To know that complex things cascade, that no one sees it coming, that connection cuts both ways, to know all of that as we now do, is to have a chance the fallen never had. The mirror is not a sentence. It is a gift. It is the deep past handing us the one thing it never had for itself, foresight. So look into the mirror without fear tonight and then set it gently down. You did not cause the fragility of the world, and you cannot, alone from your bed in the dark, mend it. That is not tonight's task, and it is not yours alone to carry. Tonight's task is only to have seen clearly and to have understood, and then to rest, because the awareness itself, held by enough of us, is the only thing that has ever helped, and you have added yours to it simply by lying here and understanding. That is enough. Set the mirror down and rest, rest. And now, before the night grows too deep for thinking, let us find the deep comfort that is hidden inside the whole hard pattern, because it is there, and it is real, and it is the truest thing to carry down into sleep. The pattern is not only rise and fall, it is rise and fall and rise again. The wheel does not stop at the bottom, it keeps turning. Remember what came after the Bronze Age collapse. The long dark, yes, but then out of that dark, slowly new things. Iron that opened a whole new age. New alphabets, simpler and better than the old, that would spread literacy far more widely than the palace scribes ever had. New peoples, rising in the space the old powers had left. And in time, from those quiet centuries after the fall, came some of the most luminous achievements our species has ever produced. The classical world, philosophy, democracy, the great flowering of art, and thought that the very Greeks who had forgotten how to write would one day, centuries on, give to the world. The collapse of the golden world was the soil from which an even greater one eventually grew. The Dark Age was not the end of the story. It was the long, quiet, necessary pause between two songs. This is the shape of the whole pattern, and it is a shape of hope, not despair. No fall has ever been final. No dark age has ever lasted. Every ending our species has ever suffered has, in time, become a beginning. The drowned cities, the buried temples, the fallen empires, all of them gave way eventually to something new, often something greater. The wheel turns down and then it turns up. The winter of a world is always, eventually, followed by a spring. Not for everyone, not without loss. The fall is real and its griefs are real. But the pattern, taken whole, across the long sweep of time, bends not toward oblivion but toward renewal. Life and civilization and the human spirit have been knocked down more times than we can count, and have risen every single time and built again. Let that be the comfort you carry into the deep of the night, that the whole pattern is not a story of doom but a story of endurance. Things fall, that is true, and it cannot be argued away. But things also rise, and that is just as true and just as much a law of the human story. Whatever falls, something rises from it. Whatever ends, something begins. The golden world fell, and from its ashes came a world that fell in its turn, and from those ashes came ours, and ours too is part of the same unbroken turning, held in the same great rhythm that has never once in all of human history failed to turn back up toward the light. Rest in that great turning wheel as your eyes grow heavy. You are held in a pattern older than any single world, a rhythm of fall and renewal that has carried our kind through every darkness there has ever been and always brought it back to morning. Nothing is ever finally lost. The wheel keeps turning. The spring keeps coming. Rest in the deep comfort of the pattern. Rest. You have understood the fall and its lesson and its pattern. Let the understanding go now gently, and let us do the sweeter thing for the rest of the night. Let us simply go back and be there in the golden world before any of it fell. Come aboard a merchant ship in the good years and cross the bright sea. It is a fine morning and the ship is loaded, and the crew push off from the harbor into a sea like hammered blue metal under the early sun. The sail fills. The water chuckles along the hull, and the ship settles into the long, easy rhythm of a voyage in a world at peace. The creak of timber, the sigh of the wind, the endless soft hiss of the sea sliding by. Below in the hold lie the treasures of the connected world, the copper ingots stacked like slabs of the sun, the jars of oil and wine, the colored glass, the bolts of cloth, the small precious things wrapped and stowed. And the merchant, standing at the rail, watching the coast slide past, is a man at ease in a world that works. He knows these waters. He knows the ports ahead and the harbor masters and the prices and the customs of a dozen peoples. He has made this crossing many times and will make it many more, and there is no shadow on any of it, only the good work of carrying the world's goods across the world's sea in the long, bright peace of the golden age. The islands pass. The gulls wheel and cry. At night the ship anchors in some sheltered cove, and the crew eat and talk and sleep under the enormous stars, and in the morning they go on. Port to port, coast to coast, the ship threads its way through the busy sea, one of hundreds like it, weaving the great world together with its cargo as a matter of ordinary, peaceful, prosperous routine. Let yourself sail with them in the golden years across the bright and busy sea. There is nowhere you need to be but here, on the gently rolling deck, the sail full, the coast sliding by, the treasures safe below, the whole connected world spread out around you in its long, calm noon. It will end, this world, but not on this voyage, not on this bright morning. Here now it is simply the sea and the sun and the good work and the peace. Rest on the merchant sea, rest. Come into port with the ship at dawn to one of the great harbors of the golden world, Ugarit perhaps in its glory, or any of the busy coastal cities, and let the ordinary morning bustle of a working harbor hold you. because there are few sounds more soothing than the sounds of a world going peacefully about its business. The harbor wakes early. Even before the sun is fully up, the quays are stirring, the ships riding at anchor, the small boats moving out to them, the porters and the sailors and the merchants beginning the long day's work of a trading city. There is the creak of ropes and the knock of timber, the calling of voices in a dozen tongues, the rumble of goods being rolled and carried, the whole warm, industrious murmur of a harbor coming to life. Watch the goods come ashore, the copper and the tin, the great jars of oil and wine rolled carefully down the gangplanks, the bales and the bundles and the baskets, the exotic things from far away that make the crowd pause and point. And watch the goods go out, the local wares, the harvest of the land, the crafts of the city, loaded for the next port down the coast. This is the heart of it, the beating heart of the whole connected world, here on the busy quay, where the goods of 100 lands change hands and change ships and flow onward, keeping everything supplied, keeping everything bound. And all of it so ordinary, so taken for granted. The harbor master with his lists, the merchant haggling over a price, the porter sweating with a jar on his shoulder, the child watching the ships with wide eyes, the old sailor mending a sail in the strengthening light. Nobody here is thinking about the fate of civilizations. They are thinking about the day's work, the day's trade, the day's small human business. And that is exactly the beauty of it. The vast connected world in the end was made of days like this, of harbors like this, of ordinary people doing ordinary work in the warm morning light, and it was good, and it was real, and it worked. Let the sounds of the waking harbor carry you gently down, the ropes and the timber, the voices and the goods, the whole warm murmur of a world at work in the dawn light. It is one of the most peaceful sounds there is, the sound of ordinary life in a world that holds together. Rest in the harbor at dawn, in the golden world, in the long good morning before the end. Rest. Now come inland and uphill in the evening to one of the great citadels, to the hall of a king, in the golden time where a feast is being held, and let the warmth and the firelight and the old songs hold you as the night deepens. The hall is the heart of the palace, a great room with a round hearth at its center where a fire burns bright, and the smoke rises to a hole in the roof, and the walls are painted with frescoes that glow in the firelight. Scenes of the hunt, of the sea, of processions and battles and gods. The king sits in his place, and around him his warriors and his kin and his honored guests, on benches along the walls, and the light of the great fire moves over all their faces. And there is plenty. That is the feeling of it, abundance, security, the deep ease of a people who have more than enough. Roasted meat and bread and wine poured from great jars into cups of bronze and gold. The good smells filling the warm hall. The talk rising and falling, the easy laughter, the old stories told again, and a bard perhaps taking up a lyre in a corner, and beginning to sing the old tales of gods and heroes, the deeds of the ancestors, the songs that bound a people to its past, filling the firelit hall with the deep pleasure of a story well told. This is the golden world at its most content, gathered in the warm hall, fed and safe and among its own, the fire bright, the wine flowing, the songs rising, the winter dark held at bay beyond the great stone walls. These were the people who believed their world was eternal, and on a night like this, who could blame them? Everything in that firelit hall spoke of permanence, of plenty, of a way of life so solid and so good that it must surely go on forever. Let the firelit feast hold you now as you sink towards sleep, the warm hall, the bright hearth, the good food, the old songs, the faces glowing in the firelight, the deep contentment of a people at their ease in a world that had given them everything. It would not last, but on this night it is whole and warm and good. Let the bard's old song become a sound without words, and let the firelight hold you, and rest in the feast in the hall, in the golden world, in the long warm evening before the dark. Rest. And now, one night, because we must gently, and only once, let us stand with a family on the coast, on the ordinary evening when the ordinary world ended, not to frighten you, only to honor them. For the way it came to them is the way it came to so many, and it is worth feeling softly before we let it all go. It is an evening like any other, a family in a house in a coastal town at the end of a normal day. The meal is done. The children are drowsy. The last light is fading over the sea, and the first stars are coming out, and everything is as it has always been. And then someone, a child perhaps still at the door, says, "There is a light on the water." And they come and they look, and far out on the darkening see there are lights that should not be there. Fires, the glow of burning down the coast where the next town lies. And ships, many ships, black against the last of the light, closer than any friendly ship should be. And the family stands in the doorway in the warm evening and understands slowly, with a cold that has nothing to do with the night air, that something is coming. That the world they woke up in this morning is not the world they will sleep in tonight. We do not have to follow them further. What happened to the coastal towns of the collapse we know, and it was hard, and there is no need to dwell on it in the dark. Let us leave them there in the doorway in the last moment before, the family together, the children close, the warm house behind them, the strange lights on the sea, and let us feel only the enormous tenderness of it, that they were just people, an ordinary family at the end of an ordinary day, who loved one another and expected tomorrow to be like today, exactly as we do, and who were overtaken by a history far larger than themselves, exactly as anyone might be. Hold them gently, and then let them go, for they have been at peace for 3,000 years, and nothing that happened to them can happen to you tonight. Safe in your own warm dark under the same stars they saw. Their evening ended, but it ended 3,000 years ago, and it is only a story now, and the telling of it is a kind of remembrance, a way of saying that they mattered, that they were real, that they are not forgotten. Rest in tenderness for the family in the doorway, and in gratitude for your own quiet night, which is whole and safe and yours. Rest, and for those who lived, for there were always those who lived, there was the road away. Let us walk it with them gently, as the last of the golden world falls behind, because in their leaving there is not only loss, but the quiet beginning of everything that came after. They did not all die, the people of the falling world. Many fled before the fires or after, gathering what they could carry and taking to the roads and the hills, leaving the burning cities behind them, walking away from the only world they had ever known toward a future they could not imagine. Refugees of the collapse in their thousands, moving across the ruined land, carrying their children and their few precious things and the memory of a golden world already passing into legend behind them. It is one of the oldest human sights there is, and one of the most enduring, the people on the road, leaving the ruin, carrying what they can, walking toward whatever comes next. It is a sight of grief, yes, but it is also, if you look, a sight of extraordinary resilience, because they kept walking. They kept carrying the children. They kept against everything going on. And where they stopped at last in some new valley, some higher and safer ground, they began again, planted new fields, built new homes, humbler than the ones they had lost, and raised their children, and told them the stories of the great world that had been, and slowly, over generations, built something new. Everything that came after the collapse, the iron, the new alphabets, the new peoples, the classical world, all of it came from people like these. From the survivors on the road, who did not lie down in the ruins and die, but gathered their children and walked on and began again. The golden world fell, but its people or their children or their children's children endured and carried the human story forward through the dark and out the other side into the light of a new age. The road away from the ruin was also, though none of them could see it, the road toward everything that would come next. Let yourself walk that road gently as you drift toward sleep, leaving the fallen world behind, carrying what matters, the children close, the way ahead uncertain but open, the deep human stubbornness of going on carrying you forward step by weary step toward a new beginning you cannot yet see. It is a road our kind has walked 1,000 times out of 1,000 fallen worlds, and it has always in the end led somewhere. Rest on the road away in the great enduring company of the survivors walking on toward the morning. Rest. Think for a gentle moment about how we know any of this at all, because it is a quiet marvel and a soothing one. The golden world fell 3,000 years ago and forgot itself and was forgotten. And yet here we are tonight, walking through it in detail, knowing its kings by name, reading its last letters, holding its cargoes in our minds. How? Because the dust remembers. Because the earth kept it all patiently in the dark and gave it back. The letters we have read tonight were baked hard in the very fires that destroyed the cities, and buried in the ruins, and lay there in the dark for 3,000 years. And then careful hands lifted them out, and patient scholars learned to read the old lost scripts, and the voices spoke again. The sunken ship gave up its treasures to divers on the seabed. The ruined citadels gave up their walls and their frescoes and their tablets to the archaeologists. The very pollen in the mud of ancient lakes gave up the secret of the drought. Piece by piece, from the dust and the ash and the seabed and the deep sediment, the vanished world has been reassembled and given back to the light. There is something deeply consoling in that as you drift. Nothing is ever truly, finally gone. It is only buried, only sleeping, only waiting in the dark for the patience and the wonder to come and wake it. The scribe who wrote his last unsent letter could not have dreamed that anyone would ever read it, that 3,000 years on, in a world beyond his imagining, his words would be spoken aloud in the dark and carry a stranger towards sleep. And yet here they are. Here he is. The dust remembered him. The earth kept his voice. And it keeps them all, the merchant and his cargo, the king in his hall, the family in the doorway, the whole vanished golden world, held in the patient dark of the ground until we come with our brushes and our wonder to lift it gently back into the light. We are the memory of the fallen world. We are the ones the dust was keeping it for. And in reading its letters and knowing its names and telling its story tonight, we do the one thing that undoes the forgetting. We remember. We remember them. And in being remembered, they are, in the only way that lasts, not gone. Let that be a soft comfort as you sink, the dust that remembers, the earth that keeps, the long patient dark that holds every lost thing safe until the wondering comes to wake it. Nothing you love is ever finally lost. It is only kept in the dark waiting. The golden world proves it. It was gone and forgotten, and now it is here tonight, remembered in you. Rest in the deep, kind keeping of the dust. Rest. The great systems fell, the empires, the trade networks, the palaces, the writing, all the intricate machinery of the golden world. But not everything fell. Some things endured straight through the collapse and the dark and out the other side, unbroken. And it is worth resting near the end on what those enduring things were, because they are the things that endure through every collapse, including any we will ever face, and they are humbler and truer and more durable than any empire. What endured? The ordinary things, the deep things. A mother still loved her child through the fall of the world. That did not stop. People still planted seeds and reaped harvests, humbler harvests, but harvests. The turning of the seasons did not stop. They still gathered around fires and told stories and sang. The human circle did not stop. They still buried their dead with grief and care. Love did not stop. They still looked up at the stars, the same stars, and wondered. Wonder did not stop. Beneath the crash of the great systems, the deep human things, love and family and work and story and wonder and the turning of the earth went on unbroken, as they have gone on through every catastrophe our kind has ever suffered. This is one of the most important and most comforting truths the deep past has to give. When we imagine collapse, we imagine the end of everything. But collapse is never the end of everything. It is the end of the systems, the fragile, complex, top-heavy structures of a civilization. And underneath those systems always is the bedrock of ordinary human life, which is far more durable than any system built on top of it. Empires are fragile, trade networks are fragile, but a mother's love, a shared fire, a planted field, a told story, a look at the stars, These have survived every collapse in the whole human record, and they will survive any that is still to come. They are what we are, underneath everything we build. And that is a thing to hold with deep peace. Tonight, whatever fears the mirror of our own world may have stirred, even if the great systems of any age should falter, and all systems in all ages eventually do, the things that matter most are not the systems. They are the ordinary human things which no collapse has ever destroyed and none ever will, because they are not built on top of the world. They are the world, the deep unbreakable ground of it, that every civilization rises from and returns to and rises from again. Let what endures hold you now as you drift toward the deep, the love, the fire, the field, the story, the stars, the deep human bedrock that has survived every ending and will survive every ending still to come. You are made of the things that last. You are standing on the ground that does not fall. Rest in what endures. Rest. Let us go gentler still and rest near the end, in the sheer vastness of the time we have been traveling through, because there is a deep peace in it, in feeling how small a single life is against the great slow turning of the ages, and how that smallness, rightly held, is not a sorrow but a release. 3,000 years. That is how long ago the golden world fell. And 3,000 years is already almost too long to feel. It is the whole of recorded history since. All the empires and wars and wonders you have ever heard of, stacked one upon another between that fallen world and this quiet night. And behind the golden world stretch thousands upon thousands of years more, of humans, and behind them the vast dark reaches of deep time, the ages before there was anyone at all. Against all that, a single human life, yours, mine, the scribes, the king's, is the briefest flicker, a spark struck in an enormous dark, bright for a moment and then gone, and we spend so much of our brief flicker afraid, clutching, striving, aching over things that will, in the great turning, matter for less than an instant. The worries that keep us awake, the fears that gnaw at us, the endless anxious weight of a single small life taking itself too seriously against the vastness, and the deep past gently dissolves it. Because if the mighty Hittite empire that ruled for ages and seemed eternal is now a faint set of ruins and a name we nearly forgot, then how heavy really are the worries of one small life on one small night? How much do they weigh against 3,000 years? Not nothing. Your life matters, every life matters. The smallness is not a belittling. But the worries, the fears, the frettings, the anxious weight we carry, those, the deep past sets gently down for us. They are real and they are yours, but they are also small and passing, and held within a vastness so kind and so patient that it has room for all of them, and will carry them as it has carried the griefs of every soul who ever lived, into the same deep quiet that took the golden world and gave it peace. Let the vastness hold you now, small and safe as your eyes grow heavy. You are a brief warm flicker in an enormous ancient dark, and that is not a terror but a mercy, for it means your burdens are brief too, and your fears are small against the turning, and you can set them down tonight and let the great, slow, patient ages hold you, exactly as they hold the fallen world in a peace far larger than any single life. Rest, small beneath the turning. Rest. And here, near the last, is a thought to hold with something like gratitude that the ending of the golden world 3,000 years ago is a gift to us tonight. That their fall, terrible as it was for them, became, across the long reach of time, a quiet kindness handed forward to everyone who came after, because they left us the lesson. The people of the golden world paid the full price of the collapse, the fire, the loss, the dark, but they did not pay it for nothing. Buried in their ruins, baked in their last letters, written in the pollen and the shattered walls, was a warning and a wisdom that they could never use themselves, but that we can. They showed us, at the cost of their own world, how complex things fall. They showed us that no civilization is exempt, that connection is fragile, that no one sees it coming. They gave us, out of their own ending, the one thing that might help us face our own foresight and humility and the knowledge of the pattern. That is what the study of the fallen worlds is, in the end, not a morbid dwelling on ruin, but the gathering of gifts. Every civilization that ever fell left in its falling a lesson, if only we will read it. And we, uniquely in all of history, can read them all, the whole long record of rise and fall laid open before us. Every fallen world a teacher, every collapse a warning, every survival a hope. No people before us ever had that. The Bronze Age world fell blind, with no long history behind it to learn from. We fall, if we fall, with our eyes open, with 3,000 years of fallen worlds to teach us. That is their gift. That is what their ending bought for us. And there is a deep tenderness in receiving it, in feeling that the scribe of Ugarit and the king in his hall and the family in the doorway did not suffer entirely in vain. That their lost world became, across the ages, a lamp held up to light our own path. That in remembering them and learning from them, we honor them and give their ending a meaning it could never have had for them. They could not save themselves, but they can, in a way, help save us, and that is a kind of immortality and a kind of grace, and a reason to hold their memory not with fear but with gratitude. Let that gratitude be the note you rest on, near the end of the night, thankfulness to the fallen world for the hard gift of its ending, a quiet honoring of the people who paid the price and left the lesson, and a deep peace in knowing that nothing they suffered was wholly wasted, because it reached across 3,000 years to teach and to warn and to be remembered tonight by you. Rest in gratitude for the gift of their ending. Rest. And now, as the night grows very deep, it is time to let it go, the golden world and its fall and its lesson and its pattern. We have held it long enough. We have understood it as fully as we can. And the last and gentlest thing to do with any great and heavy story is to set it down softly and let it rest, and let ourselves rest along with it. So let the golden world go. Let the ships sail out of your mind and over the horizon. Let the kings and their letters fall silent. Let the citadels stand empty and the harbors quiet, and the great fires die down to embers and then to ash and then to the long cool dark. Let the scribe finish his letter, or not finish it, and lay down his stylus and rest. Let the whole bright vanished world sink gently back into the deep past where it belongs, kept safe in the dust, remembered, honored, and released. You do not have to carry it. That is the gift of the end of every night here, that you may set down whatever you have been holding, however great, however heavy, and simply rest. The fall of the Bronze Age is 3,000 years done. Its lessons are gathered, its people are at peace. And you have given it what it needed from you tonight, your attention, your wonder, your remembering. That is enough, that is complete. You may let it go. And in letting it go, feel how much lighter you become. All the weight of the story, the loss, the fall, the great sad pattern of rise and ruin, you can lay it all down now into the deep kind dark and keep only the quiet comfort underneath it. That things fall, but things also rise. That nothing is ever finally lost. That the ordinary human things endure through every ending. That you are small and safe beneath the great turning. And that the wheel always, always turns back toward the light. Let the golden world go gently into the dark, and let yourself go with it down and down toward sleep. There is nothing left to hold. There is nothing left to understand. There is only the quiet and the dark and your own slow breath and rest. Let it all go. Rest. Let us end where we began, with the scribe and his letter in the burning city 3,000 years ago. Because there is one last turn to that small story, and it is the gentlest and most hopeful thing in all of tonight, and it is the perfect thing to carry down into sleep. Remember him, the scribe of Ugarit, pressing his reed into the wet clay by the wrong-colored light of the burning sky, writing his king's desperate plea for help against the ships that had come. And remember what became of his letter, that it was never sent, that the fire took the city before the messenger could carry it, that it sat in the oven where it was being baked, and the burning of the world sealed it there, unsent, unanswered, a cry that reached no one in the last hour of a dying city. For 3,000 years, that is what it was, a message that failed, a plea that went nowhere, words written in terror and never read by the one they were meant for. If the scribe's ghost had lingered, he might have grieved it forever, that his last work, his final urgent words, had come to nothing, had helped no one, had vanished with his world. But he was wrong. The letter did not come to nothing. It only took a very, very long time to arrive. Because 3,000 years later, careful hands lifted it from the ruins, and patient scholars learned again the lost art of reading it, and its words were spoken aloud once more, and they reached someone at last. They reached us. They reached you tonight in the dark. The plea that no one answered in its own hour has been heard, 3,000 years on, by more people than the scribe could ever have imagined. Every listener who has ever drifted toward sleep on the sound of his story, all of us, receiving at last the message he thought had failed. And is that not the most hopeful thing? that nothing sent out with such urgency and such feeling is ever truly lost, that even a cry that seems to reach no one may simply be taking the long way across the centuries to the ears that were always going to hear it. The scribe's letter was never sent, and yet it arrived. It failed in its own moment and succeeded beyond all measure in the fullness of time. Everything that is written down with enough love or fear or hope finds its way in the end to someone, even across 3,000 years, even across the fall of a world. Let that be the last thought you hold as the night closes and sleep draws near, the letter unsent that arrived after all, the voice silenced that speaks again, the plea unanswered that has been heard at last by you tonight. Nothing loved is ever finally lost. Everything finds its way home in the end, however long the road. Rest with the scribe of Ugarit, whose last words reached you across 3,000 years and were not, after all, in vain. Rest. So let it all go now gently into the dark. The golden world and the ships and the kings and the fire and the fall. Let them sink back into the deep past where they rest, kept safe in the dust, remembered, honored, released. You have carried them long enough. You may set them down. Thank you for spending this long night with me on the shores of a vanished world. If you drifted off somewhere among the golden harbors or on the merchant sea or in the firelit hall, then it worked, and I am glad, and you needed no ending. And if you are still here at the very last, then let these be the words you keep. Things fall, but things also rise. Nothing loved is ever finally lost. The ordinary human things endure through every ending, and the wheel always, always turns back toward the light. You are held in a pattern older than any world, and it has never once failed to turn back up toward morning. There is another fallen world on another shore in another age, waiting in the next codex. Another ending and another lesson for another night, but not now. Now there is only this, the quiet room, the soft dark, the golden world at peace beneath the dust, and you, safe and small and held and finally completely at rest. Let your breath go long and slow and easy, and let go. Nothing loved is ever lost. The wheel turns back to the light. Sleep now. The sea will keep everything until morning.